Welcome, adventurer. Sit and relax. Before we begin, let your body rest a little deeper into whatever is holding you. Loosen your jaw. Let your breathing slow. You are listening to Campfire Night Stories, where old nights return gently, like footsteps in snow. If these stories help you drift into sleep, you're welcome to stay with us, to subscribe, to leave a quiet like, and to return whenever the night feels long. Now, the fire is low, and the city is waiting. The bell rang once. Not loud, not urgent, just enough to let the city know that daylight was finished. I'd been walking this route for years, and still, every time the curfew bell sounded, something inside me settled, as if the walls themselves exhaled, as if the city, tired from being alive all day, finally allowed itself to rest. I stopped beneath the archway and listened. Shutters closed, one after another, wood against stone. The sound traveled slowly down the street, like rain beginning far away. Somewhere, a child was being called inside. Somewhere else, a candle was blown out with a soft breath. This was the hour when rules mattered most. I lifted my lantern and continued on. The streets were narrow here, the houses leaning inward like old men whispering secrets. Every door was marked, every window remembered. In daylight, this place felt crowded. At night, it felt contained, held together by silence and habit. A man hurried past me just before the final bell. I didn't stop him. He had the look of someone who knew exactly where he was going. Fearless men were dangerous. Focused ones were not. The bell rang again. This time, heavier. The gates would be closing now. Anyone still outside after the third bell would sleep beyond the walls, where the rules ended and the night did not forgive mistakes. I turned down a side street where the baker lived. His oven was dark already. It always was. Private ovens were forbidden, and he obeyed without complaint. Fire, once loose, did not care who owned it. Stone ovens, watched and shared, had saved this street more times than anyone could count. I paused and listened. No crackle. No glow beneath doors. Good. Fire asleep meant the city would wake again. A voice drifted from above, a warning, spoken clearly, practiced. I waited until the sound of liquid hitting stone had passed before stepping forward again. The woman leaned out her window just long enough to see me nod. Then she withdrew, shutters closing gently. Rules were not unkind. They were careful. As I walked, I tapped my staff against the stones, once every few steps, not to announce myself, but to keep rhythm. Stillness bred thoughts. Thoughts wandered. Wandering led to mistakes. The lantern's light barely reached the walls. Beyond it, darkness pooled quietly. I had learned not to stare too long into it. Nothing good ever looked back. At the square, I stopped. The market stalls were empty now, cloth pulled tight, ropes tied cleanly. During the day, people complained about the rules here, about where they could stand, how long they could linger. At night, those rules revealed their purpose. The square was clear, open. If fire came, it would be seen. If trouble started, it would have nowhere to hide. I listened again. Somewhere far off, another watchman called the hour. His voice moved through the streets like a hand brushing over water. All was well. I adjusted my cloak and continued my circuit, knowing that before dawn I would walk these same stones again, the same doors, the same silence. And the city would still be standing, not because it trusted luck, but because it trusted its rules. The fire beside you crackles softly now. The night holds steady. The city changed after midnight. Not in ways you could see easily, but in how it sounded. Footsteps softened. Even the wind seemed to move more carefully, as if it had learned the rules too. I slowed my walk without thinking, my body remembering this hour better than my mind ever could. Near the eastern wall, the stones were colder. They always were. The sun reached them late, and in winter, not at all. People avoided this stretch during the day, complaining that it felt wrong. At night, it felt honest. I raised my lantern slightly and checked the gate. Locked. Barred. Sealed. The men assigned to close it had done their work well. They always did. No one wanted to be remembered as the one who opened the city to darkness. The gate was more than wood and iron. It was a promise. Inside, there were rules. Outside, there were none. I rested my hand against the stone and listened. Nothing moved beyond the walls. Good. I turned back toward the inner streets, where the houses stood closer together, and the air smelled faintly of bread, even now. The baker would wake before dawn, as he always did, but until then his ovens would remain cold. Fire slept when the city slept. That was how it survived. A cat slipped across the street ahead of me, quick and silent. Animals learned early. Dogs without clipped claws stayed near their doors. Cats kept to shadows. Anything loud or careless did not last long here. As I passed a row of homes, I noticed one shutter not fully closed. I stopped. Rules were not suggestions. A single open window could spill light, sound, or warmth into the street. Light attracted eyes. Eyes led to trouble. I lifted my staff and tapped once against the stone. The sound echoed softly. A moment passed. Then the shutter moved, slow and careful, closing the rest of the way. I caught a glimpse of a face tired, apologetic. I nodded once and moved on. No words were needed. Shouting at night was forbidden for a reason. Sound traveled too far when the city slept. Panic traveled farther. At the well, I paused again. A rope lay coiled neatly beside it, dry and unused. Wells were watched carefully after dark. Water was life. Poison spread faster than fire, and fear spread faster than both. I checked the cover, then the seal. Intact. Somewhere nearby, a baby cried briefly and was soothed just as quickly. Mothers learned the rules faster than anyone. Silence kept children alive. I continued my route, my lantern swinging gently, the light tracing the same patterns it always had. I knew every crack in these stones. I knew where puddles formed after rain. I knew which corners stayed darker, longer. The rules had taught me. They taught everyone, eventually. As I walked, I thought of the first winter I'd worn this cloak. How heavy it had felt. How loud the city had seemed, even at night. I had been afraid then, of fire, of thieves, of failing to notice something small that would become something deadly. Now, fear had softened into attention. Attention was safer. I reached the square again just as the distant bell marked another hour. Slower now, lower. The sound folded itself into the streets and disappeared. I stood still until the echo faded. The city slept on. And I kept walking, carrying the rules with me, step by step, through the dark. By the third hour after curfew, the city felt lighter. Not empty, just less burdened by thought. This was the hour when most dreams had settled in, when bodies stopped shifting in bed, when even worry grew tired and lay down beside its owners. I walked more slowly now. There was no need to hurry. Nothing good ever came from rushing through the dark. Near the western quarter, the houses grew older. Their beams bowed inward, their stones worn smooth by centuries of hands brushing past. Generations had lived and died here, without ever leaving these streets. The rules had kept them close. The walls had kept them alive. I passed a doorway marked with chalk, a simple sign, barely visible in lantern light. Plague years had taught people to mark sickness early. The family inside would not open their door for anyone tonight. They would not be shamed for it. Distance, here, was mercy. I lowered my lantern slightly as I passed. Respect mattered. At the corner, I stopped again. The air felt different here, colder, sharper. I listened, longer than usual. A rat darted from shadow to shadow, hugging the wall. It paused, nose twitching, then disappeared into a crack between stones. Even pests followed patterns. Even they understood the quiet language of night. In the distance, wood creaked. Not fire, just a house settling. Old buildings sighed like sleeping animals. You learned the difference, or you didn't last long in this job. I adjusted my grip on the staff and continued. As I walked, my thoughts drifted not forward, but back. To my first night on watch, when I'd asked why we closed the gates so early in summer, when the light still lingered. The older guard hadn't answered right away. He just looked at me, then at the walls. Because night doesn't ask permission, he'd said. I understood now. The rules were older than we were, older than names. They were shaped by firestorms, by winters that killed half a street, by sickness that emptied entire houses overnight. Each rule was a scar. And scars, once earned, were not forgotten. I reached the small chapel near the wall. Its door was locked, as always at this hour. Candles were never left burning inside. Too many prayers had ended in ash before that rule existed. I rested my hand against the door for a moment, feeling the cold wood beneath my palm. Then, I moved on. At the edge of the square, I heard it a soft sound, barely there. Fabric shifting. A footstep, careful but real. I stopped. Lantern lifted. Staff grounded. The sound froze. A man stood half hidden between two stalls, cloak pulled tight around him. His eyes reflected the light, wide but not wild. "You're late," I said quietly. He swallowed. "I know." He carried no weapon, no sack, just fatigue. "Gates closed," I said. He nodded. He already knew. Rules did not bend for tired men. If they did, they would break for worse. I gestured toward the wall. "There's shelter near the old stones, out of the wind." Relief crossed his face, slow, grateful. He bowed once and stepped back into shadow. I watched until I was sure he was gone. Mercy existed within rules, but only inside their shape. The bell rang again, distant, calm, patient. Another hour kept. I turned, letting the lantern swing gently, and continued my path through the sleeping city. There is a moment in every night when the city feels almost weightless. It comes just before dawn, when darkness has spent most of its strength, but light has not yet arrived to replace it. The air grows still. Even the fire inside homes seems to pause, waiting. I felt that moment settle as I walked toward the northern streets. Here, the houses stood farther apart. Gardens lay behind low walls, their soil resting until spring. In winter, this part of the city smelled of earth and cold stone. In summer, of damp leaves and quiet water. I passed a well-known corner and slowed without meaning to. This was where a fire had started once, long before my time. A single candle left burning beside a bed. A man who meant to stay awake and didn't. The flames had climbed faster than anyone could run. Now, every house on this street extinguished candles early, not because they were told to, but because memory lived here. Rules did not need voices when memory spoke. I lifted my lantern and checked the doors as I passed. Iron bolts, wooden bars, marks worn smooth by years of use. Locking a door was not an act of fear. It was an act of care for the people inside, and for the neighbors sleeping just a wall away. From behind one door came the sound of breathing, slow, even, a whole household asleep together. I moved on quietly. At the far end of the street, the watch path narrowed, hugging the inner wall. I preferred this stretch. The stones here held the cold, keeping me alert. Comfort dulled attention. Cold sharpened it. Above me, the sky was beginning to thin, not brightening, just loosening its grip. Stars faded one by one, as if being gently dismissed. I thought of the rules about morning bells, how they were rung differently than the night ones. Faster, lighter, not warnings, but invitations. Not yet. For now, the city still belonged to the night watch. I stopped near the granary and listened. Grain stores were guarded closely. Hunger made people brave in the wrong ways. A single sack stolen in winter could start a fight that ended in blood. All was quiet. Good. I leaned my staff against the wall and rested for a moment, feeling the stone press through my cloak. Standing still was allowed here only because I had reason. Everything had its place, even rest. A breeze moved through the street, carrying the smell of smoke, not fresh, not dangerous, just the lingering memory of last night's fires, safely buried beneath ash. That smell meant warmth. It meant morning would come. Somewhere behind me, another watchman passed at the far end of the road. We did not greet each other. We didn't need to. Our footsteps already spoke the same language. The city was held together by small, quiet agreements. I pushed away from the wall and continued my round, lantern low, steps steady, letting the rules carry me forward as they always had. The first hint of morning was not light. It was sound. A shift in the way the city breathed. Somewhere, a board creaked more sharply than before. A bird stirred in the eaves, unsure if it was time yet. Even the air felt different, thinner, less secretive. I slowed my pace. Dawn made people careless. Rules mattered most at the edges of night. Near the tanner's quarter, the smell grew stronger, sharp, unpleasant, unmistakable. This street was watched closely. Wastewater ran near the walls, and sickness had once taken hold here faster than anywhere else. Now, doors stayed sealed at night, and no one complained. Complaints didn't cure illness. I checked the markers on the doors, faint chalk signs, renewed every evening. No new marks tonight. Good. As I turned the corner, I noticed a faint glow beneath a shutter. I stopped. Light at this hour was not forbidden, but it was watched. I approached quietly and raised my lantern just enough to see the latch. The glow vanished almost at once, followed by the soft sound of breath being held. I tapped the door once. "Careful," I said, not unkindly. "I know," came the reply, barely a whisper. That was enough. The rule had done its work. I continued on, letting the lantern swing low again. Somewhere behind me, the light did not return. Near the river path, frost clung to the stones. My steps rang sharper here, echoing faintly off the water. This stretch always felt exposed. The river carried more than trade. It carried stories, sickness, strangers. That was why the gate along the river closed earlier than the rest. I checked it. Locked. Satisfied, I rested my hands on the top of my staff and listened to the water move. Rivers never slept. They ignored rules completely. That was why we respected them. I thought of the travelers who would arrive after sunrise, cold, stiff, grateful. They would complain about the gates, about waiting, about sleeping outside the walls. They always did. And then they would eat, warm themselves, and forget. I turned back toward the heart of the city as the sky grew paler, the darkness thinning like mist. Soon, the morning bell would sound, and the rules would shift again, loosening, changing shape, but never leaving. Rules did not disappear. They rested. And for one last stretch of night, I walked on, holding the city together until the day was ready to take over. Just before the morning bell, the city feels unguarded. Not because it is unsafe, but because it trusts what has already been done. The rules have carried the night this far. Now they loosen their grip. Not all at once, but gently, like hands opening after holding something precious. I walked the inner ring one last time. The stones beneath my boots were lighter now, no longer holding the deep cold of midnight. Frost retreated into shadow. The sky above the rooftops softened, its darkness thinning into a pale, uncertain gray. I passed the baker's house again. A faint warmth had returned to the stones near his door. Not fire yet, just the promise of it. He would wait for the bell. Everyone did. Starting early invited attention, and attention invited mistakes. Patience was another rule. At the edge of the square, I stopped and listened. The city was waking in pieces, a cough behind a wall, the scrape of a chair pulled closer to a hearth, the low murmur of a prayer spoken before work began. None of it was loud enough to break the night. That mattered. I moved toward the watch post near the chapel, where the lantern hooks stood empty, waiting to be filled again after dusk. My own lantern burned low now, its flame small but steady. I liked that. A flame that burned too bright burned too fast. I rested my staff against the wall and stood still for a while, letting my thoughts drift without direction. After a night like this, thinking felt unnecessary. The rules had already decided everything that mattered. Somewhere beyond the walls, a rooster crowed too early, then fell silent, as if embarrassed. Inside the city, no one answered. Not yet. I thought of the man who had arrived too late for the gate, of the family with the marked door, of the child who had been pulled inside before curfew. All of them safe, not because the world was kind, but because it was careful. The sky lightened another shade. Soon, the bell would ring again, and my watch would end. I would hand the lantern to the next man, exchange no words, and walk home through streets that no longer belonged to the night. But for a few more breaths, the city was still mine to carry. I lifted the lantern slightly and took one final look around at doors still closed, at windows still dark, at streets held together by habit and trust. Then I began my last slow walk toward the tower, steps measured, breathing easy, letting the night fade behind me without hurry. The morning bell did not rush. It never did. It waited until the night had fully let go, until even the most stubborn shadows had loosened their hold on doorways and corners. When it finally rang, it sounded different from the others, lighter, almost gentle. I was already near the tower when the first note spread across the rooftops. That sound meant release. Not freedom, just change. I stopped walking and stood still as the bell finished its call. Somewhere nearby, another watchman extinguished his lantern. A door opened cautiously, then another. The city stretched, slow and careful, like a body waking from deep sleep. I leaned my staff against the stone and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The rules shifted now. Gates would open. Fires would wake. Voices would return. But nothing happened all at once. That was the secret. I watched as the baker stepped outside, rubbing his hands together, eyes lifted toward the paling sky. He waited a moment longer before turning back inside. Even now, habit guided him. Even now, patience felt safer than speed. Across the street, a woman opened her shutters just enough to let in air, not light. She would widen them later. There was no need to rush the morning. I began the walk home. Without the lantern, the streets looked different, softer, less guarded. The stones reflected a faint silver instead of gold. The rules had done their work. They no longer needed watching. As I passed the square one last time, I noticed the place where the man had stood hours earlier, too late for the gate. The ground was empty now. He would be gone by daylight, slipping into the city unnoticed, as most travelers did. The rules were not meant to punish. They were meant to hold the night in place long enough for morning to arrive. I reached my door and rested my hand against the wood. Inside, the room was cold, but clean, safe, unchanged. That mattered. I hung my cloak, set the staff aside, and sat on the edge of the bed without lying down just yet. The habit of alertness lingered, slow to fade. Through the window, I heard the city waking carts rolling, voices greeting one another. A laugh carried briefly before dissolving into the morning air. Life returned. Quietly. I lay back and closed my eyes, letting the sounds blur together, trusting the rules to take care of the rest. They always did. The fire beside you has burned low now. Only warmth remains. The city has moved on, carrying its rules into the daylight, where they will be invisible again, felt, but not noticed. You don't need to watch anymore. The night has passed. Sleep can take you the rest of the way. Thank you for being here. I'll leave you with this small, dying fire for a while longer. Get some sleep, traveler. You need strength for your own great adventures that await you today. You are welcome here. See you next time.